And now, the best 60-ish seconds of your week. And as summer officially comes to an end, there's lots to talk about, but let's start with some good news, because this week, Dave McCormick, who narrowly, less than 1,000 votes, lost the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate a couple of years ago, announced that he's running again, this time against Bob Casey, in what will be undoubtedly the most watched U.S. Senate race in the country. You know, it's pivotal, as it was 2 years ago, and many of us believe that had Dave McCormick been the candidate 2 years ago, the Republicans would control the U.S. Senate now, and he would be Senator McCormick. But God had other plans, and now Dave's a candidate again. Someone who has served his country incredibly well, went to West Point, went on to serve with distinction in our armed forces, was an incredibly successful businessman who continues to create jobs here in Pennsylvania. And already the incoming fire is there from the Democrats, which tells you something. They're afraid of his candidacy. They are already attacking him for being an out-of-stater. He's not. He lives in Pittsburgh. I've been in his home. Born and raised here in Pennsylvania, from the only town in Pennsylvania, Bloomsburg, PA, where his father served as distinction as president of Bloomsburg University and later worked for Governor Bob Casey and was the chancellor of the state system of higher education for many years. Both his dad and his mom, prominent Pennsylvania educators. Dave McCormick is the real deal, and his authenticity, his genuine character is going to shine through against Bob Casey, who's had almost 2 decades in the U.S. Senate and can't point to one substantive thing that really has mattered to Pennsylvanians. I believe this campaign will ultimately boil down to a rephrase of Ronald Reagan's old question, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago, by simply asking Pennsylvanians, what has Bob Casey done for you? And this week, the next GOP debate tees up at the Reagan Library, a great place. If you haven't been there, you really owe it to yourself to visit Simi Valley. The Reagan Library is without a doubt the best of the presidential libraries, and you ought to try to visit all of them, but Reagan Library stands out as number one. What's interesting is that, again, Donald Trump will not be there. The clear frontrunner for the Republican nomination at this point. There are a lot of folks chasing him, and there are some folks who are going to need to do exceedingly well on the debate stage Wednesday night. Nikki Haley has an opportunity for a breakthrough moment. She had a little bit of one where she cracked the glass at the last debate, but this is her opportunity to really shine. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis has got to do something to rescue his flailing campaign. I thought he did in the first debate, but frankly, the voters across the country don't seem to have agreed with my perception of that first debate, because he's continued to drop and drop and drop. A recent poll in New Hampshire now shows him in 5th place, with his support there more than cut in half since July. That's not a campaign that's on the trajectory anybody who wants to be successful sees. So DeSantis has got to do well in Wednesday night's debate too, and it remains to be seen who will actually be on stage. But bluntly, if you're not there, your campaign is probably on life support. And the Biden impeachment inquiry began to pick up steam this week, and bluntly, there's a lot to look into there. But beyond the impeachment inquiry, there is just the question of his ability to serve in the role. This week, passing by the communist dictator, and I use those terms somewhat advisedly, of my native land of Brazil, missing him altogether, not shaking his hand, et cetera, et cetera. You just have to wonder what's going on. But the corruption that surrounds the Biden family is now coming to the fore, and we're going to see, I believe, additional indictments there, but certainly an awful lot of evidence pointing right to the big guy. And while we're talking about impeachment, there is increasing talk of impeaching Merrick Garland, who went before the Congress this week in some of the most unbelievable testimony you can imagine, refused to answer virtually every tough question, ducking, darting, dodging, weaving, not looking anybody in the eye and telling them the truth. And when he was asked, did you meet with the FBI about Hunter Biden? Well, he couldn't remember. I mean, are you serious? You could probably ask him what he had for lunch 3 weeks ago and he would be able to tell you, but he can't remember whether or not he met with the FBI to discuss a case involving the vice president or president of the United States' son. Hard to believe. And Again, before they get to the impeachment of Merrick Garland, they ought to try Alejandro Mayorkas. There's lots of impeaching to be done if you want to begin to really look at what this administration has done, because the southern border crisis continues and the numbers streaming illegally across that border, while Mayorkas tells us that everything is hunky-dory, are really, really frightening. Garland did say one thing. He agrees with the FBI director that says there's a true crisis there. Mayorkas ought to be paying attention. And closer to home, Governor Josh Shapiro now says that you can have automatic voter registration when you get your driver's license renewed. Think about how that would actually work. First of all, there's a question as to whether or not he can do that on his own motion and by executive fiat, or whether it has to go through the General Assembly. But while that plays out, just think about the mechanics. We're told by the Secretary of State that you have to have proof of American citizenship to get a driver's license. I'm not so sure about that, but it's worth checking into, because if that isn't the case, then the whole thing falls apart under its own weight. It's a bad idea policy-wise, and whether or not Josh Shapiro can do it simply by the stroke of his pen is another question altogether. And as there always seems to be, there's talk again of a potential government shutdown over congressional spending, or better way of saying it, U.S. government spending. And those folks who want to simply rein in government spending and do us all a great service by so doing are being told that they're childish and this and that and the other thing. We're talking now about adding $2 trillion to the national debt, which already stands at $33+ trillion. It took the U.S. over 200 years to get to $1 trillion, and now we're at $33 trillion, potentially looking at $35 trillion. And you know, Everett Dirksen used to say a billion here and a billion there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money. So let's think about what $1 trillion really represents. If you spent $1 every second, it would take you 12 days to become a millionaire. It would take you 31 years to become a billionaire, and it would take 31,000+ years to become a trillionaire. That's $1 trillion. A better way of saying it is, if you spent $1 million a day, think about that, $1 million every day, it would take you 500 years beyond the birth of Christ to today to get to $1 trillion. It simply is an astronomical and staggering number that puts pressure on us, but more importantly on our children and grandchildren, because it simply is not affordable. And finally, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania mourns the passing of JoAnne Epps, who was the interim president or acting president of Temple University. When she suddenly passed this week, the board there voted to posthumously name her as university president, and to her, her family, and the entire Temple family go our sincere condolences. And for now, that is the best 60-ish seconds of your week.